Health Chats. I'm Clare Davis, and I'm all about helping you bring emotional fitness into the workplace. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe. If you're listening on podcasts, please follow. This series is all about burnout, and burnout is something I'm really passionate about helping people in the workplace to avoid. And burnout can really creep up on us. And that's why I'm really excited about having my guest, Harpreet Chana, with me today, who's going to give us some more insights into burnout in the workplace. Hi, Harpreet, how are you?
Oh, I'm great. Thank you, Claire. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much for being here. And what it would be really interesting for all the listeners and viewers out there is to find out a little bit more about yourself. So tell us all about you. What do you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'm actually a qualified pharmacist. I qualified over 16 years ago, and I've worked across the sector, but I actually worked 12 of those years in corporate. And I had 2 senior national positions. I did very well. I had a senior national position at the age of 30. And it was during my time in one of those positions that I really started to struggle with my mental health. And, I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment, but my experiences is what led me to retrain in 2018 as a coach. And I now am an executive leadership and mental wellbeing coach. And I actually bring the two together. I cover both the self-leadership part and the mental well-being, and I now train and coach both organizations and individuals, particularly around mental ill health prevention. So, this was great when you invited me to come and speak today, because it's absolutely what I do.
Well, I'm so glad you're so passionate about this, and you can see it in the way you're speaking. And what would be really interesting is to find out a little bit more about why are you so passionate about helping especially senior leaders with regards to burnout?
Well, it's because I've been there. So I come from personal experience, and once you've been in that situation and you've kind of come out through the other side, the thing for me was I tried a few different things at the time, and what started off as stress became burnout. I didn't deal with that for a number of years. That then became depression. I didn't deal with that for a number of years. And unfortunately, I felt so bad that one day I just didn't want to be here anymore. Now, thankfully, I didn't act on those impulses, but my goodness, was that the wake-up call that I needed? Because up to that point, just like you said, Claire, it crept up on me. It wasn't something I woke up one day and I suddenly felt like this, or there was some sort of trigger or some sort of an event or adversity that I'd faced that suddenly made me feel depressed. It was the stress that led to burnout, which I didn't deal with, which led to the depression. And that day I had a real wake-up call in, I really don't think I'm okay here, and I think I need help. And that was the first step, being able to admit it to myself. I was a senior executive. I was a very high achiever, which a lot of senior executives are. I was a born self-starter. So I was left to my own devices. I didn't have much support. I didn't have hardly any leadership development, again, which a lot of senior executives face. And I was kind of just left to my own devices. And unfortunately, it got the better of me. And I had been working with a counsellor up until that point, but they hadn't been the most helpful. And what had really helped me was working with a mindset coach who completely transformed my life. She got me to realize just how much of what had happened to me was as a result of my own thinking, my own crooked thinking, what I was doing and saying to myself, which led me down this path of stress, burnout, and depression. She gave me such a gift that I decided to retrain and give that gift on to other people, because I looked around and I thought, I can see so many other senior executives who are in the same place that I was, and they're going to end up in the same place that I was in terms of feeling stressed and burnt out. And actually we can prevent this, because if I can teach them what I was taught, if I can help them to get better control of their thinking and to start looking after themselves and prioritizing their well-being rather than everything else and everyone else, they might not have ended up in the same way that I was that particular day on that railway bridge, which is where I ended up. And I just do not want anyone to end up there. And no one needs to, actually, if we can just intervene early enough and start putting in some healthy practices.
Thank you, Harpreet, for your honesty and for opening up, because it can be very, very difficult to talk about these things for a lot of people. And what intrigues me is that you're probably not the only one who's been there. I've been to burnout stage. I haven't quite been to the lowest of depressions that you have, but I've been very, very burnt out in a management role as well. So have you got any statistics out of interest, just to show the viewers that there's a lot of people out there feeling this way?
Absolutely. Forbes did a study last year that they did a survey that looked at how many workers were experiencing burnout, and it was over 50%. This is over 50% of our workforce that is currently experiencing burnout. This was in 2021. They are set to repeat the study again this year, the survey again this year, and it was set to increase. We can see that when we look at the trend, and you probably cover this in your shows, but we're looking at the trend of the incidence of ill mental health on the increase because of the pandemic. So it would be interesting to see what that figure comes out at. But to have more than half the workforce struggling with burnout, this is another pandemic of its kind.
It's huge. It's absolutely huge. And we do need to address it. We need to be helping our workforce as managers, as senior leaders, but everybody within the workforce, helping ourselves and helping others. So if you were to give somebody 3 pieces of advice who felt like they were on that spiral down or burnout, what would they actually be, Harpreet?
The first step, and I always say this to anyone who asks me this question, the first step is you've got to acknowledge your own burnout.
Yeah.
This is the one thing that I didn't do. You have to take stock of where you are and accept that it's okay not to be okay. I've just told you more than 50% of the workforce is feeling the same way, and I suspect it's probably even more than that now. So the first step is acknowledge where you are and that you might not be okay. And it is hard because we have such high standards of ourselves as high achievers, with senior executives, that we feel that burnout really is a weakness. It's not a weakness.
Yeah.
So many people struggle with this. So the first step is really can you acknowledge your own burnout? And that's that, and start to be kind to yourself. We're really same as that same tip, to acknowledge it, but then be kind to yourself. Don't judge yourself for being in burnout. Extend that same compassion that you give freely to other people to yourself. What would you say to somebody else who was coming to you and saying, I'm struggling with all the things that you're struggling with? Would you tell them off? Would you say, well, you're weak? Would you say, well, you need to get a grip, you need to get over it? Of course you wouldn't. But we say these things to ourselves all the time, and this is part of the problem. So acknowledge your burnout and extend yourself some self-compassion, and don't beat yourself up too much about the fact that you're in this state. As I said, more than half the workforce is. The second tip is you need to have a conversation, and first and foremost, you need to have a conversation with yourself.
Yeah.
In that, and this is sort of, how have you got here? Where are you right now? What's the cause? It's trying to understand, what is the cause of this burnout? Is it the role that you're in? Is it the boss that you have? Is it actually your workload is just too much and you can't manage it? Is it a home situation? Is it actually you're in a relationship that is really quite stressful? Maybe it's financial pressures. It's about, okay, I've got to take stock and figure out what is causing my burnout, because it just becomes too easy to push it down, to ignore it, and to put a mask on to the rest of the world and pretend that everything's fine, when inside it's a completely different story. And we all do this. I call it the mask of capability. We all put on that mask and pretend to everyone that we're more than capable, we're really successful, we've got it, we've got it sussed. But on the inside, particularly if you're at burnout stage, it's a completely different story. You're hiding how you're truly feeling. So it's about having to have that conversation, figure out where that comes from, and then having to have it firstly have the conversation with yourself, and then secondly have a conversation with the other person that's the cause, whether it's you need to have a conversation with your boss, whether it's you need to have a conversation with your spouse, whoever it is. And I go through this in my Banish the Burnout training. You need to figure out what the cause is, and then go and start to try and resolve that, rather than just pretending that it isn't a problem and ignoring it. And finally, you've got to set some limits.
Yeah.
And setting limits and boundaries, because part of the reason why we have such a problem with burnout is because, particularly during the pandemic, we've blurred the lines between home life and work life, and home space and workspace. And so we feel that a lot of us, particularly at senior level, we're working all the time, we can't switch off. It's really quite difficult. And so it's about putting in some boundaries and starting with yourself. Yes, we can put in boundaries with others, but you've got to start, everything starts with us. We've got to start with ourselves. So doing things like setting a stop working time, right? So you're saying at the beginning of the day, you're looking at your workload and you're saying to yourself, I'm going to finish at this time. And then actually sticking to it, rather than just saying, you know, because the problem is when we don't have a boundary, we fill, and you'll know this from your experience, we stretch the work to fill the time, because things will come up. Fires will land on your desk and you think, oh, you know what, I'll do that now because that other piece of work I need to do, I'll just do it later. I'll do it tonight. I'll do it when the kids are in bed, you know. And then what happens is that lack of boundary, you just end up working all the time. If you say to yourself, I have to be finished by, I don't know, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, then when fires do come on your desk, yes, you're still dealing with them, but you know you've got to get this other work done. It forces you to be more productive and efficient during the day. This is just one example, Claire, that I'm giving in terms of setting boundaries with yourself, and things like scheduling downtime. Again, we just don't do it. We schedule everything else, which is a priority, but we don't schedule our own downtime. And so it's looking at your calendar and saying, where can you give yourself an hour, maybe even 2, during the week? Lord, believe I say that, but you know, during the working week, if you can, where you walk away from your desk and you actually have an hour to yourself, whether it's a lunch break, whether you go out for a walk somewhere in nature, but something that's a time for you to decompress and process. Because a lot of the time we'll think, I haven't got time. Actually, you haven't not got time. You have to make the time. And so you can't afford not to take the time to do this, because it's one of the best things for your well-being. And that's a really quick whistle stop tour of sort of 3 things that you can do for yourself.
But it makes sense. And I think on the last point that you said, I'm going back to where I went through a stage of burnout, as I mentioned, and I'm just going back to that and remembering that the expectation of that organization was that we worked 15, 16-hour days. And if we had a lunch break, it was a big taboo. And then when I went to my next organization, the expectation was that we left on time and we started on time and we had a lunch break. And it had become a habit in my head, a habit that I have to work these hours, I can't have lunch. And it actually took my manager, my boss, saying to me, Claire, you must have a lunch break. And then at the end of the day, Claire, you must leave. And I said, no, I can't leave. I've got too much to do. And she said, what's going to happen if you don't do that now? She kept saying, what's going to happen? But it took breaking that habit in my mind to actually be able to overcome that and not feel guilty. And it took me many, many weeks and months to get over that. So it becomes this habit, this mindset, as you said, you went to a mindset coach to change, which can be really, really hard. So that's brilliant advice. Thank you, Harpreet, for that.
Yeah.
And you mentioned a course that you've got called Banish Your Burnout. So would you like to tell everybody a little bit more about that and also where people can find you?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, I offer a Banish the Burnout course, which I've been doing for organisations. It's a 2-part course, and so it's 2 hours, and we start with the first hour, which gets you to sort of figure out that whole thing of taking stock, where I am, why I am where I am, and then you come back for the second week and we start to I could take you through my 7 steps of trying to prevent and deal with burnout. And so I've been delivering that all over the world, and it's you know, it's had some fantastic reviews. So if that's something that you would like to do, you know, and I can come in and do it for your organization. I also run a Lead Well, Live Well, which is a 4-part course. Again, it's bringing the self-leadership and the well-being together, because actually they're inextricably linked. You know, poor leadership leads to poor well-being leads to poor leadership. They are linked, and so we have to deal with both. You can't just deal with one or the other. And I also coach senior executives all over the world, again, on a number of things, but predominantly around this piece, getting that leadership right within themselves. And, you know, having the confidence to, you know, even in your situation, what you were saying, Claire, if you're in a situation where you're expected to work 15, 16-hour days without a break, and that's too much for you, having the confidence to be able to accept that it is and actually do something about it, whatever that might be. And that can be really quite daunting when you're on your own. You know, you do have to work with somebody, and that's obviously what I do. I help coach my clients to make that next right step for them. So yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn under Harpreet Chana. my website is www.thementalwealthacademy.com. You can find me there too.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your insights and your wise words. I think those 3 pieces of advice are so, so important. And I'm going to rewatch this because we need to be reminding ourselves of these things all the time. So thank you, Harpreet, for your time. And thank you to all the people watching and listening. And take care.
Thank you.